So you go through the period of disorientation. You say what you need to say. You let yourself rail against God and just express all of that deep hurt and human emotion. And then over time, you move into the Psalms of new orientation or reorientation, depending on how it's rendered. And that is not the same as orientation. New orientation has kind of a deeper understanding of the world. I think it's Psalm 30. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. Right? That acknowledges disorientation, that we went through something hard, but now we are in a new place.
Welcome to Psalms for the Spirit, a podcast about spirituality and resilience through the lens of the biblical Psalms. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Reverend MaryAnn McKibben Dana, pastor, author, speaker, and leadership coach, known for her prolific writing, including her popular weekly Substack called The Blue Room. I'm excited to share the news that MaryAnn has a new book out, Better Than Normal, which explores how cultural norms shape who is able to thrive and who is left feeling like they don't quite fit. Her book invites us into a more spacious and compassionate and liberated way of being in community together. In our conversation, we bring that lens into the Psalms, exploring the movement from orientation to disorientation to reorientation. The Psalms don't assume a single normal way of relating to God. They make room for trust, for struggle, and for those moments when something begins to shift and we find our way again. What I especially appreciate is her reminder that disorientation isn't failure, but a meaningful part of the spiritual life. One that can open us to deeper and more honest connection with God. I know you'll be enriched by hearing from MaryAnn today, and whatever it is that brought you here, I'm so glad you're with us.
I love the Lord, who showed me mercy, who heard my voice and heard my cry. Long as I live, I will call upon you, because you've listened and saved my life. When the chains of death had tangled round me, when grief and suffering had weighed me down, distress and sorrow had overcome me, I called my God to save my life.
MaryAnn, welcome to Psalms for the Spirit. I am so glad that you're able to come and talk with me on the podcast today. We have chatted before because you did this wonderful workshop on Visio Divina for the Deeper Well community, which we really appreciated, and it just sparked so much for us. So this is the second time I've been able to chat with you online, and we've never met in person, but I feel like we have. So
Agreed.
Yeah. So it's great to have you on, and I'm so excited about your new book coming out. And I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy, which I really thought was so special and cool. And I have delved into it a little bit, but I also have pre-ordered, and I am waiting for my physical copy that I can really dive into. But in the beginning, you talk about the Psalms. So that really piqued my attention, of course. And I wanted to hear about that, and also just about your book in general, and tell us, about that. But before we get on to that, let's hear a little bit about yourself. How do you like to describe yourself so we can just get a flavor of who you are?
Yes, thank you. It's really good to be with you again, Kieran. And I do feel like we know each other across the miles, across the ocean, as the case may be. I'm coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area, where I've lived for the last almost 24 years, and am a pastor. I currently am working in a Presbyterian Church USA congregation in Herndon, Virginia, which is the next town over from where I live. And I am a writer. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm also a wife and a parent to 3 young adult children, ages 18, 20, and 23. 23. Yes. You lose a little track when they get to be a certain age. When they're little, it's like they're 3 3/4, and then it's like, how old is this young adult that's out
and
in
you're
the
like,
world?
you're guessing years.
Yes, I have to do the math, right? Okay, what year is this? What year was she born? But yeah, it's a fun and interesting phase of our lives where they're really making their way in the world, but still kind of need the support of parents to sort of bounce ideas off of. And it's been a really fun and, difficult at times shift to think about what it's like to be parenting in a different phase of their life, but really a great joy. And so the piece that brings us together in particular today is the work I do writing. My fourth book is coming out this April, this month, and it's called Better Than Normal: Virtues for an Off-Script Life. And Better Than Normal wants us to examine the kind of assumptions we make about what it means to be human, and how often those assumptions put people into very rigid and kind of fixed boxes. And we will be understanding of people who are outside of those boxes, but really there's an implicit value placed on looking a certain way, acting a certain way, our bodies working a certain way. And so it's all about sort of upholding a default idea of what it means to be human. And so Better Than Normal is trying to examine the values that we can shift into a more transformative direction so that our world is just much more broadly inclusive and welcoming. And part of that may mean just blowing up the whole idea of what normal even is. And it came out of the experience of parenting children through difficult mental health challenges that they all are working their way through in really wonderful ways. And I think have gotten through the worst of that at the moment, but realizing that a lot of those challenges came from their living in a world that really wasn't built for them. All three of them have some kind of neurodivergence that they have, and it was a struggle to kind of figure out what that meant. And now I think they're starting to see the strengths in those different ways of being. But when you live in a world that's set up for a certain kind of mind, it can be very burdensome to try to figure out how to be yourself. And so that was the initial kind of inspiration behind writing the book. And as I explored it more, I really began to look at other, not just neurodivergence, but race and gender expression and sexual orientation and all of these things. And expanding beyond the kind of default way we think about what it means to be human, I think would be liberating for all of us. So that's what the book is about. That's
great. Yeah, I love the premise of it. And as you're talking, I was remembering that when I was a kid, we had this saying, like I remember my sister and her friend kind of joking, and they're like, everybody's weird, so that means everybody's normal, sort of challenging that.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
It's like, you know what? We're all weird in different ways, and therefore it's normal to be weird.
Exactly. Yes. I was talking about this in a workshop a few weeks ago, and someone said his way of thinking about it is normal is just a setting on your dryer. And otherwise, it's just really not a useful concept,
It just doesn't apply to human beings who are all unique and wonderful in their own ways.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think you named something really important, which is the pressure of external expectations and societal norms that, without even realizing it, people can feel that they're trying to meet. And if they don't, for whatever reason, then they feel they're inadequate or they feel frustrated. And then, as you're saying, parenting can be difficult because you're trying to help your child succeed in a world that maybe it doesn't seem to be built for them. And so you've really navigated a lot. And so what was it like for you to write about that and explore that? And then to see how, as you're saying, it went beyond neurodiversity or neurodivergence.
Right. Yes,
diversity.
right.
So into other areas. And so did that help you to see things, sort of outside of your own situation, but kind of broaden your perspective?
Yeah, it really opened up a lot for me. And it's also, I think, a very vulnerable thing to have this book in the world, because I also, writing it helped me realize what my own blind spots are, and that I benefit as a person who walks around in a white body. I kind of, things are sort of built by people who look like me and therefore built for people like me. And so I am putting this offering into the world, and it's out right about the time that this conversation will be shared with the world. And it's a vulnerable thing. I am sure that I will have said things in a way that were not quite right. I'm still fumbling my way towards understanding how we really can build this world that's really intended for the broad spectrum of human experience. And yet I speak from my own experience. And so I'm already aware of ways that that could touch some tender places in people, both people who have been excluded in the past and are still trying to find their way in the world and fight for their own needs and for a world that works more broadly for human flourishing, but also maybe people who have benefited from, you know what, the world works great for me. I don't really see the need to change. And so there's a little bit, there's just a lot of unknowing. And ultimately, as a writer and as a podcaster, you understand this too. We just need to put our things in the world and trust that they will be used in a way that they need to be used. And so it's a real servant kind of orientation, I think, that I try to bring is, this is an offering, and I really hope that it will open some minds, and I trust that it will. I'm already hearing from people who are appreciative of what the book offers, but it's a vulnerable thing to have it out there. So we'll see what happens.
It's courageous to share your story, no matter what it's about. And it is, even your personal story is very tender, and it's very courageous of you to share that with perfect strangers, And then on top of that, you're talking about issues that are sensitive in a wider sphere. And so, good for you for doing it and just sharing authentically of where you are and taking us on the journey with you, because we're all on a journey of understanding and trying to be better people in the world. And so, I think you've done a great thing by just being honest and putting it out there, and maybe even starting conversations that can continue from here.
Yes, I hope so. And I really want to give credit and appreciation to my own kids who gave permission for their stories to be told. And the book is not a memoir. It's not a personal history, but there's a lot of that woven into it. And I gave them all the opportunity to read the whole book. I think one of my kids read the whole thing. The others kind of maybe did a little bit of a search for, the parts that would
their names.
Right, exactly.
Maybe you didn't use their names, but
I didn't use their names, but just the kind of the pieces they could kind of page through and find. And I think that's one of the things that's such a gift of Gen Z and probably the generation younger than that, and millennials too, to some extent, that there's a lot of stigma that's been removed in terms of mental health, and even just different way. One of my kids has a chronic illness and is very upfront about it. And so there's just this kind of, this is who I am. This is what I'm dealing with. And there's no point in trying to hide or to pretend everything's okay when things aren't okay. So that honesty, I think, can really show a lot of us the way. Those of us who grew up in earlier eras where it was like, this is a shameful thing you didn't talk about. And if you needed therapy, that was unusual. And now I was like, I don't know how people make it in the world without therapy or some kind of guide, spiritual direction or a mentor of some kind to help you through. So they're really showing the way. And so I just try to honor that story and honor that trust and that willingness to be honest and try to be honest myself.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness there's less of a stigma around that now, because it's just become so much more common for people to seek any kind of help that they need with regard to mental health. And it's making a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Lord, you are gracious, full of compassion. When I was troubled, you protected me. My soul may rest now in consolation, because you've listened and turned to me. I love the Lord.
When it comes to your mention of the Psalms, you talked about Walter Brueggemann's idea of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. And I definitely, I was excited to see that because I have been wanting to talk to somebody about that for the longest time. And it's such a helpful way of framing the Psalms. And so would you mind kind of sharing how that framework came into your writing and your thinking process, just as you brought it up pretty early on in the book?
Absolutely. I feel very fortunate to have studied under Walter Brueggemann. He was one of my professors
lucky.
At Columbia Seminary back in the early 2000s. In fact,
wow.
I graduated in 2003 and he retired that year. So there was among my graduating class, Charlie Kauser was also a giant at the seminary and he retired the same year. So there was we're all moving on at the same time.
You
Charlie
are
Kauser
so
was
fortunate.
It really was wonderful. I got to take one class from him and it was on the Psalms. It was this very topic. But I am trying to remember, I'm pretty sure that I was aware of this work of his before becoming a seminary student, before going to seminary. But I can't know for sure, but I do know that I heard him speak at some point, even before I was a student at Columbia. And he talked about this work. I think that if people are looking for a particular book that kind of really explicates this the most clearly, I think it's called The Message of the Psalms. Dr. Brueggemann wrote, I think, dozens of books. He was so prolific. He died in the last couple of years. So we lost a real giant in biblical scholarship and a real prophetic voice.
Yeah.
But I remember him saying, this would have been pre-2000. So I wonder if this would still be the case because, boy, he had a almost 25-year career after that. But that he said that of all the things that he's done, all the work that he's done in the writing, he felt like the work on the Psalms and this threefold series is going to be the thing that endures the most.
Is that
which I thought was really interesting.
That's interesting. I mean, I know a lot of people who respect him for a lot of different things, but the number of times I've heard people reference that just randomly, it's like, wow. In people who aren't necessarily obsessed with the Psalms like I am, but they're just, they remember it. It is very memorable and it helps to capture not only the Psalms, but I think something about our lives and about our human experience. And maybe that's what makes it so kind of, and so let's get into what it is, right? I'll say that one of the easiest kind of connections, a lot of people are familiar with Richard Rohr's work around order, disorder, and reorder, and our lives moving through those patterns. I think that the Psalms of orientation, disorientation, and new orientation really map onto those really well, but they're very focused on the Psalms. So the Psalm of Orientation is, and in his book, he will give you, there's tons and tons of examples of each of them. And it's one of those things, once you learn it, you start to see it all over and you're like, oh, what kind of Psalm is this? And some don't fit neatly into one of those three categories. They kind of move from one to another, but it's still helpful to think about. And so a Psalm of Orientation is simply, the world makes sense, is very kind of binary. There's like good and there's bad, and it's very easy to know which is which. Psalm 1 is a really good example of that. Happy are those who follow in the ways of the Lord, like you're going to be rewarded and the wicked will be punished. And so things just make sense. And there are times in our lives, and sometimes people attribute that to kind of when you're young in the faith, whether you're a young person or whether you're newly kind of exploring what your faith is, there can be a very, I don't want to use this word pejoratively, but kind of a rudimentary sort of like the rules are very clear. And I think when people were first starting out, we kind of need that, the sense of boundaries, and we're learning what morality is. Anyway, so that's an orientation, and it's a very sturdy place to stand. Yeah.
Until it's not anymore. Right. And that's where the Psalms of disorientation come into play. Right. Yeah. So we think about the lament Psalms, the ones where there's this heartbreak, and that's when orientation no longer makes sense. Right. So good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And then sooner or later, we're going to find that breaks down.
Right.
And there's lots of examples of that in the Psalms. I mean, we're recording this during Holy Week, and on Maundy Thursday, I will be in the pulpit. And I think we don't do this every year, but what we often do at the end of that service is we read Psalm 22, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Such a famous psalm of disorientation and so deeply significant that it is what Jesus utters on the cross, right? This sense of being deeply forsaken. And that is when the old rules no longer apply. I thought you would be here with me. I thought that the world made sense. I thought that I was doing what you wanted me to do. And now I am in this deep pit of despair and discouragement and feeling abandoned. And I think, one of the great legacies of Brueggemann's work and also just the Psalms of disorientation in general is that they're right there. Like they didn't remove them. We can talk about this a little bit later, but that's really important that they didn't gloss over those hard things, right? So you go through the period of disorientation, you say what you need to say, you let yourself rail against God and just express all of that deep hurt and human emotion. And then over time, you move into the Psalms of new orientation or reorientation, depending on how it's rendered. And that is not the same as orientation. New orientation has kind of a deeper understanding of the world. I think it's Psalm 30. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, right? That acknowledges disorientation, that we went through something hard, but now we are in a new place. And so the Psalms of what are called the Psalms of Ascent, that section of the Psalms acknowledges a difficult period that has now ended. And so those are the three movements of the Psalms.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about them specifically, individually. As you were talking about disorientation, I was getting this image of like wandering in a forest or something and just actually being disoriented in that literal way where you're like, I don't know which direction I'm supposed to go. I've lost my way. I can't tell where my anchor points are. I can't find the right, orientation. And so I just got this really kind of clear image of what that would be like to be disoriented. And I think that's such a good word to describe a lot of what you find in the Psalms when people are just like, I don't know what's what anymore. I don't know which direction I'm supposed to turn anymore. And that movement from orientation to disorientation is like, I used to know my way. I used to know what was up and what was down and black and white, and things used to kind of make sense in certain categories. And now suddenly they don't, and I'm disoriented. And then the return to, or it's not a return to what was, but it's a new orientation. It's finding.
Right. Yeah.
Finding
there's some stability in it. Like there's some kind of, okay, we can breathe again. So it shares that with orientation, that it's not quite so. I love the way you clocked that word because I hadn't thought about it visually, right? That you are literally wandering around lost when you're disoriented. And to even push on the metaphor further and to play with this, and I may be borrowing this from Brueggemann. I haven't read his book in quite a long time or revisited my notes from that class that I took with him. But I think of orientation as you just kind of know where everything is. I mean, it's like wandering around your own hometown, or the place where you live. Like, I don't need a GPS to get to the grocery store. I know how to get there. That's orientation, right? And disorientation is like when you move to a new place. And I always tell people when they move, I said, for me, it's a rite of passage when I move to a new community to just, and this is a reference that is going to make sense in the United States, but like wandering around the Target crying because I can't find the thing because I'm used to the old.
This isn't my Target.
This is not my Target. I don't know where the shower curtains are, and how just even the simple things feel really difficult. And so new orientation or reorientation is not a familiarity. Maybe it's like you have a compass or you have the GPS, you have the thing that will help you get, right? That'll help you find where you need to go, but it's not familiar in the same way. It's a set of tools, perhaps, right? Like I can make it through this landscape that is not what I expected. It's not what I signed on for, but I have the tools to make it work. And for us, those are faith tools, right? Of prayer and companionship and worship and devotion, whatever they might be. that helps us through, even if we don't recognize the landscape that we're in. We're not abandoned there. I think that's what's really powerful about new orientation or reorientation.
Yeah. And I'm sort of thinking that it's like finding new landmarks. You know, if you had your landmarks in the beginning and your orientation, you know what you're looking for, and then suddenly you can't find those anymore. Those aren't available to you anymore. And you're lost and you're feeling that disorientation. But then you either get the tools like a compass or a map, but also maybe you start to see the landmarks and you're like, okay, and now I know what I'm looking for again. And maybe it's something new this time. Maybe it's completely new landmarks that you wouldn't have looked for before. And I think that's where the change in perspective that in some ways that you're trying to get people to in your book is like, let's reorient ourselves toward a different way, like new landmarks that we're looking for to keep us right and not returning to old ways of being, but we're transitioning into something new. So while we might be feeling lost in the middle sometimes, and we feel that we don't have that, you know, those points, those landmarks or anchor points, but then when we get to that reorientation, we have something to look to.
It's beautiful.
So I'm sure that, I mean, that in some ways that might follow the trajectory of your book a little bit, that you lead us somewhere, you know, where we can start to look for new things. So what are some of the things that you discovered that were your new points of focus that you wanted other people to be able to sort of reorient themselves to as well?
That's a great question. And I'm sitting here trying to remember which chapter of the book the Brueggemann stuff comes into. It's one of the first two. So basically there are 6 chapters, and each of them is a transition from kind of an old, outdated value that we've been clinging to for our own sense of security to something that can really transform the world. So the first chapter is going from certainty to curiosity. There's a lot of certainty in the Psalms of Orientation, right? It all makes sense and the rules are clear. And if you just follow the rules, you're going to live a good life. And we see everyday examples of where that breaks down. I mean, people who are honest, make an honest living, work their jobs, and can never quite get ahead or can even get their bills paid, right? And so instead of clinging, and years ago, I ran across a quote from Daniel Pink, who's an author, and he says, people will often cling to a false certainty over a genuine ambiguity. Like we'll take certainty even if we know it's really not the way the world works. But if it's familiar, it makes sense enough, we'll just hold on to that. And I think a lot of the upheaval we're seeing in our world is people who are like, I can't pretend anymore. Like the certainties just are breaking down. So what are we left with instead? And I think this is a little bit of what we see in Psalms of Reorientation is a little bit of, if not curiosity, at least openness and trust. I think you need trust in order to be curious. And so having gone through the disorienting experience and realizing how we might put it is that God was with us or helped guide us and never abandoned us, even when we felt like we were abandoned. That just gives us a little bit of, okay, if I can make it through that, I can make it through anything. And it's God's leading that will ultimately help us in this new chapter. So let's just be curious about people who think differently than we do, who look different, who have different backgrounds. And rather than feeling like that is just inherently a threat, what if we just took a breath and thought, what if this isn't out to get me? And what if I just have something to learn here? And that seems very simple and something I think we all struggle with when we're feeling anxious and like we need to kind of hold on to our own sense of control. The other place that it might have shown up is in the second chapter, which is about going from comfort to courage. And the idea behind that is very related, similar like to certainty, right? Where comfort and putting a value on our own comfort above anything else. Like, I don't want to be, and I think there's a little bit of orientation in that too, of like, the world makes sense so long as I ignore a bunch of stuff that doesn't go along with what I think the world should be. Right. And so courage is the antidote to that, I think, because if we have courage, and courage doesn't mean we're not afraid. It just means we're afraid and we do it anyway, that we don't need that constant comfort because we have that resilience to be able to try something new and experience the world in all of its fullness rather than just our own limited experience of it. So,
yeah, I love the chapter titles. I love the way it was like, it said so much, even just, just looking at the way you broke up the parts of your book. So it was, you just said it. It was
certainty to curiosity.
Certainty to curiosity.
Yep. Comfort to courage.
Comfort to courage. What were the?
I hate that I hate they all started with C, and then my last one also starts with C. So it's hard even for me to remember. And I tried to come up with other things, but then the next chapter is going from productivity to presence, and just the idea behind that is just that we are so socialized to be useful to the world, and that is a very good impulse. We want to be of service, but we can do that to the extent that we really ignore our own inner knowing and our own limits, our own kind of need for rest, all of that. So when we can be present to that, I think we can be kinder to ourselves and to one another to say, it's not all about what you do and what you make for the world and what you produce. You also have inherent dignity and value, no matter who you are. And those are the first 3 chapters. And then the final 3, those are, I found were more individually oriented. And then the second half of the book is really more community oriented. And so that is going from artifice to authenticity. So not feeling like we need to pretend and put up appearances and all of this. And we can just be authentic with each other. The 5th chapter is from blandness to beauty. And that is the way that we sand down our kind of interesting edges in order to conform and fit in. And how do we see beauty as way more inclusive of all of human experience? And then the final chapter is from competition to community. So those values are things that we in our spaces, Kieran, that you and I walk in, talk about a lot. Authenticity and presence and all of those things are very familiar kind of faith words, but thinking about them as a way to really open up the world to be more inclusive of all, I think I hope will push people in some good directions. So.
What shall I offer for all your goodness? How shall I thank you for what you've done? I'll be your servant. I will be faithful, for you have freed me from all my chains. I love the Lord, who showed me mercy, who heard my voice and heard my cry. Long as I live, I will call upon you, because you listened and saved my life. Because you listened and saved my life.
Well, thanks so much for telling us about the shape of your book and some of what it contains. And there's so much wisdom there. And I think, individuals and communities could really benefit from reading it and just asking those questions of what are we holding on to as sort of an old way of being that actually isn't serving us or everybody in the community as well as it could. And how can we start to break free from that? And maybe it does require us to go through a bit of disorientation and sort of like, wait, I don't know my way here. And this is unfamiliar ground and I'm confused and I'm lost and even kind of upending the power structures of, all those things that we think are just set and they are the way they are, but we really start to turn that upside down. And that can throw a lot of people off, but it can also really be freeing and liberating for people. So
I hope so.
And
That's the hope.
Yeah. And are you finding that the reorientation, how does that affect people? Like, I guess in your personal story, how did you see that reorientation coming about with you, maybe in your family, in your community?
Yeah, it's I mean, the experience of the last several years, and I mean, all of this was happening for our kids at the same time as COVID. And so a lot of people, I think, were getting all of their mental furniture rearranged in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it feels like, and this kind of is where Brueggemann's work, I think, dovetails well with Richard Rohr's of like order, disorder, and reorder. It's a similar move, but his is more, Richard Rohr's is a little more kind of broadly inclusive and not specifically about the Psalms, but the Psalms is the book of our heart, right? It's every human emotion is present in this collection of songs, but there's a resilience, I think, that comes in reorientation, and you don't forget the heartbreak and the disorientation of wandering around and realizing that the way you thought the world worked doesn't work that way anymore. But it's so much richer. That landscape, I think, is just varied in it's just full of variety and depth and beauty in a way that I think the rigidity of orientation is not. It will ultimately, it's an important part of the process. And there is, again, when you're just kind of newly exploring your world, it's like when we have little kids, like we want to teach them kind of some good boundaries so they kind of know where the safety is. And as you make your way into a wider world, you need to expand those boundaries, and some of them will go away altogether. And so it's hard work, but it's very worth it, because with those tools, with the map, the compass, the awareness of presence, you can go anywhere with those. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's so empowering, liberating and empowering. And I like that you're painting a picture of a richer, more beautiful, more diverse, more, I don't know. I can't think of another word, but yeah, those words are so beautiful to think of where we're headed with this idea of reorientation. It's worth it, was what you said. I think that's, so whatever discomfort, whatever feeling of being lost and confused and things we knew falling away, all that is worth going through because of where we're headed. So yeah. So thanks for taking us through that in your book. I look forward to reading it and hearing more about your story and about what you're challenging all of us to think about. And it was really interesting to hear it in the context of, like, you know, the framework of the Psalms, because the Psalms do that for us as well. They kind of lead us toward that reorientation into a richer and more beautiful and more liberated, more empowered place. So yeah,
well said.
Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Well, just before we close, one final question about the Psalms. What do you think the Psalms have to offer us in today's world?
I really appreciate the work that people do. This has been happening, I'm sure, predates me, and it will be after I'm gone. But the Psalms, maybe alongside the Gospels, is the book that gets translated and paraphrased more than any other. I can think of books that were on my shelf from very early in my young adult faith life that were, one of them I think was called Psalms Now. And it was just a modern kind of retelling. I just found out recently, I have a version of the Gospels, which is the First Nations version. So it's an indigenous kind of, and they have a Psalms version, which I did not know. So I have to buy that now.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. And why is that? Because it has this timeless impact. It's timeless. Emotions being expressed are so human and so universal. And what makes these retellings of them powerful is because, I mean, they're universal and particular at the same time. So there's particular battles, there's particular, the ones that are attributed to David, whether he wrote them or not, really speak to like the things we know about the heartbreak and not just the heartbreak that he went through, but also the need for repentance, the brokenness of his own choices, right? And his own decisions. And so it's just got it all. And what really I think is powerful is, I'm not going to make a categorical statement about the lament Psalms, but they all are in relationship to God. So even in just the most abject misery and hardship and sadness and despair, there's still a relationship there. Even if it's a, where are you? Why did you let this happen? There's an I and a thou that are talking to one another. And I think that is also what makes them so powerful and still offer us something today, because goodness knows there is so much to lament, so much sadness. It's just right there on our screens, minute by minute. We can track it in real time. And to have the conviction that we're not doing that work alone, that God is with us, even in the disorientation, is something to hold on to. So I think they're still very powerful for us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you, MaryAnn, and I am excited to read your book, and just great to have a chance to talk more about the Psalms and about life and everything in general. So it was great to catch up with you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well, and I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Yes, I hope so too. All right. You've been listening to Psalms for the Spirit with me, Kieran Young-Wimberly, with music by Celtic Psalms. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave a 5-star review so that others can more easily find it. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this podcast, please do pass it on. And finally, make sure you sign up for my podcast email list so you never miss another episode. Until next time, may our spirits find healing and hope in the days ahead.
Praise you, be silent no more.